So, okay, I guess that one place we could start a little bit is just to say, again, is there anything particularly interesting on your mind right now? You know, like is it whatever it might be, if it's a current event or if it's a project that you're gearing up to deal with.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. I think one of the things, man, even to follow up on some of the stuff that we talked about with the El Paso Times, just the idea of being good stewards to the land, all of the different sort of like kind of like ancillary like effects of that, and how both the positive and the negative. If you're a horrible steward, what happens? What happens to community? What happens to people? How it can be a much broader effect than we grow nice vegetables.
right.
You know.
So I think one of the issues that we get stuck with when we have that conversation is kind of who decides. You know, what gets prioritized.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that is problematic in this culture, in our U.S. culture, is that we've sort of all accepted to one degree or another that if there's not a monetary value to something, then there's no value to that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think that if people were phrased that thought, if you phrased it that way to people, they wouldn't necessarily agree. But their behavior indicates, all of our behavior, I think, indicates an uncomfortable degree of acceptance of that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of liken that insidious depravity, like it's this funneling effect, to the rationale for ever increasing military budgets and ever increasing, like flexing, right?
Right.
Because if the logic is sort of the Bruce Lee thing, the first virtue is strength,
Right.
without which none of the other virtues can survive, which is true. But
Mm-hmm.
where it gets, did it die?
I don't know.
I think it's doing it.
It's recording. Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, and here's the thing: like you're gonna have to pull me back because sometimes I get too far into the theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we get there, feel free to pull me back. But all of these ideas are related in my mind. How even on a philosophical basis, that the idea that that let me rephrase that, on a logical basis, like one of the problems with looking at things as if there's this divine principle of logic. One of the principles of logic is that you can argue logically from a single point and come up with completely opposite answers.
Mm-hmm.
You conclusions. So the problem that I come back to over and over again is sort of the ghost in the machine about the inability of human beings to actually hone in on real truth consistently. And I think when I was younger, I thought that was a systemic problem or something that was artificial.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm kind of at the point where I think that it's sort of baked into our DNA or our reality, like at all levels. So there is at all times an imprecision to our ability to conceptualize or to accept or to recognize profound truths.
Right.
And so, pulling it back to the original question, when I say who decides and the issue of the funneling effect of capitalism and currency and the reduction of all human values to the value of a dollar, whether it's conscious or unconscious, And that footnote, which is like, well, yeah, if you can't pay your bills, then you can't afford to have principles. If you can't afford, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
all of that is true, but people use it. People use those lines of thought to justify frequently where they're at or where they want to go, rather than actually trying to use it and have some compassion for the process for other people to also say, hey, we don't really know. And I think that's the thing that's most uncomfortable for people is especially people who come back with, oh, you're dealing from a position of emotion, like that's less than a position of intellect or rationale, right? They want you to be perfectly rational, as if they are,
right?
But we all know that they're not,
Exactly.
and so the more they dig their heels in, the more I'm like, okay, this is not a conversation that is going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, emotions are controlled by circumstances. Where you are, the position you're in is pretty much what determines how emotional you're going to be around any particular issue. The valuation, this attachment to currency and worth, especially when we talk about things like sustainability.
Right.
I've come to the conclusion that, in terms of economy, I don't care what people like to use the dollar, people like to use gold or silver,
right?
Something tangible, something they feel like they can hold. But I see our greatest, economy being the actual ecology. Without it, we don't live.
Right.
And so we haven't made that the narrative. We haven't looked at it that way. People often view and take, for granted resources that are actually finite.
Absolutely.
And we've created this sort of extractionist culture of we can always just keep taking.
Right.
We'll find something when we run out of this. We'll find something else to take. And I think that's what a lot of the mindset behind, especially fossil fuel use, is like. Well, we'll run out at some point, but we got plenty now, and we can continue to take this, and then we'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to make it. And so there's that immediate, tangible, like, I can see this, I can hold this, I can turn this into some coin or into whatever, and it'll have an immediate impact on me.
Right.
And then when we talk about what's happening with the environment, this crisis is huge. If you look at it from, the 20,000, 25,000 foot, like, vantage point, you see it and go, wow, this is happening to you right now. But we're so close to it that we don't necessarily see it, and the impact isn't at the crisis level where we feel it, because we react to crisis when you can feel it, when there's a hurricane, when there's a flood, when there's always, that's when people go, uh-oh, it's hit the fan, we need to do something about it. And so we're stuck in this narrative of valuation based on the most tangible sort of like physical thing that we can hold or see, or create some value along those lines. And so when we talk about regenerative agriculture, sustainability, those are things that when you look at the big picture, it's like without having an environment that we can actually continue to live and survive in, we have nothing.
Right.
You can't buy that back with any cowrie shells or gold coin or silver bars.
So one of the questions there is at what point did that become a default setting? This idea of sort of the I mean, essentially it's a colonist idea that you run out of your shit, you go somewhere where there's new shit and take their shit, right? So that I tend to think that rape and pillage mentality is older than people are comfortable with thinking. Okay. And one of the bits of evidence that seems to coincide with that, the agricultural what do they call that? Is it like 5,000?
Agrarian?
Yeah, well, like when we was it 10,000 years ago we started farming, right?
Right.
Okay, like instead of
I don't know how many thousand.
Yeah.
We'll say we started.
Right.
From being like hunter gatherers to actually
to digging in and doing
cultivate,
cultivating. Okay, so my understanding about one of the theories of the practices of that has to do with with plowing, with tilling, right? And why tilling works. And you know more about this than I do, but let me just run through my little theory, and then you can correct me as needed, or we can go on from there. But something upwards of like 80 or 90% of the nitrogen that's in the soil is in the living bodies of the microorganisms, something along those lines. And when you till, you expose those microorganisms to sun and air that will kill them. Correct. And so when they die, that makes that nitrogen available for the roots to pull more nitrogen into their, so that so you get a bumper crop. So the theory goes something like this, like when people started recognizing that upended soil yielded bumper crops, they started doing that, and they're like, they don't necessarily know, well, they didn't know why, but they understood how to manipulate it, which is a principle that I come back to over and over again. People are really good at manipulating systems that they don't really understand. They just know how to get what they want out of it.
Right.
Okay? Human nature. So that's a bit of human nature that it comes up over and over again. So in this case, they saw that was going on. They move into an area, they are in an area where they till up the soil by accident or on purpose, and they realize, hey, look what we found.
Correct.
The problem is, of course, that only lasts so long until all the nitrogen that was in those dead bodies has been exhausted. Taken up.
Right.
Yeah, exhausted, and it hasn't been replenished. So then they're like, oh, the gods are against us. This place isn't feeding us anymore. We got to move to a new place, and they do it again, and that system got entrenched, like that mentality, and it's still with us in the form of that sort of industrial farming thing. Now you drive around a place like this, and you see that between seasons, the earth is reduced to a inert substrate, into which everything that you need to grow the next crop, whatever it might be, whatever the market dictates is your best course of action, you need to grow. You have to inject not only the seeds, but all the fertilizers and all the nutrients for that season. And to hell with the next season. Another principle of capitalism, today's dollar is always worth more than tomorrow's dollar. So get it while it's good.
Exactly.
Exactly. So all of those ideas go really far back. I think a lot of people want to say that like this is a product of current capitalism or some variant of capitalism, which it is. It's exacerbated by that. But I don't think that's the root. I think that these sociopathic systems sort of just capitalize on defects in normal human beings' mechanisms for understanding the world and group dynamics and things like that.
Right.
So.
Right. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I think those were nomadic societies, the agrarian societies back then. And their thing was like, all right, we'll move on. We did this here, we can do it, over there.
Right.
We can keep doing that. And as we've evolved, even with these sort of, what we call conventional agricultural practices, people realize when you extract these things, you need to put them back in somehow. Right. And what we have developed is all of these synthetic versions of the things that we actually need to put back in, because that return of investment happens so much faster. You take a bag of this, you take these three things, you throw them in there, and boom, you got the main three components that you need.
And it's predictable too. That's another.
Yeah, somewhat.
Right.
I mean, there's predictability.
Yeah.
On that very, just immediate return.
Right.
But in terms of long-term effects.
Right. That's also predictable.
Even on health. It's like, how is this affecting
right.
this actual stuff that you're ingesting?
Right.
How's it going to affect your cells? I mean, how's that going to, And so I suspect that there is research on that.
Oh yeah.
But I'm not sure that that research is, positive in terms of like the benefits of this practice, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea of, first of all, like, we don't see farmers go, hey man, used it up. Let me go get another 10,000 acres and use that up. I mean, we've hit the capacity where we can't continue to do that. And we have learned that we can continue to do this if we add the right things to it.
Right. But we take them from other places, and that practice is
exactly
unsustainable.
Yeah, we do all of these things instead of, what we do in regenerative agriculture is start with this kind of like, this is the land that I have.
Right.
I have to be a steward of this land so that it continues to produce what I need it to produce, but also what the ecology needs it to produce. And so you start to incorporate all of these different measures. You want to try to sink carbon. You want to try to do some composting. You want to create that microbial activity in the soil, so you learn the ways to do that in an organic way. And so it's a change of mindset, right? First, with the understanding that we have finite resources. We have a finite amount of water that we have. We don't get any more. That's it. We can't add any more water than the amount of water that already exists. Mm-hmm. It recycles, mm-hmm. right? How we use that water is critical to our survival.
Yeah.
But the idea of managing water in the way that it really needs to be managed for long-term use is uncomfortable because it reduces the amount of output that you can get right now, right? So if I need to grow an orchard full of trees where I basically need an ocean of water in order for them to give me my immediate return that I look for and depend on every year, I'm not necessarily going to invest in systems that are conservative.
Right.
Because that's over time that'll be beneficial.
Right. Today's dollar.
But my immediate need is I got a market.
Yeah.
And they need all of these nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I'm going to do this, and the impact that has long term on the entire community is really not my concern.
Right.
Based on our standards, right?
Right.
So the narrative, to me, the narrative needs to be switched in that the market, the community starts to understand that what is happening here is that a commonwealth is being used to benefit an individual.
Or a couple of individuals.
A couple of, yeah. I mean,
no,
a minority
of
the community is benefiting from a huge part of a common resource that we all need to survive.
Right.
And the only thing that's going to change that is for that majority to understand the value of that resource. And because we are not, in fact, not only are we not taught the value of that resource, it's almost like we're miseducated around the value of that resource.
I absolutely believe that we're miseducated about that intentionally. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one of the big moments where I was like, man, this is not the beast I thought I was fighting, mm-hmm. Was when I got into permaculture, to the degree that I understand it, took the intro course and just had that epiphany that everybody has when you are exposed to those sorts of ideas. It's like, hey, there's this body of information. Wouldn't the world be amazing if more people knew about this? So you think what the issue is that information's not available, or that people, key people don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
The people that should know it at the
mm-hmm.
At the systemic level are not aware of it. But then you start to realize that, okay, this is indigenous wisdom. This is about farming practices
mm-hmm.
and food cultivation and things like that. This is stuff that has been around forever.
So without somebody listening having to Google permaculture, how would you summarize the principle of like permaculture?
So I don't claim to be an expert on it. Mm-hmm. I know that there are these core principles that have to do with taking care of the earth, taking care of making excess available to people, regenerative practices, things like that. It typically is the conversation is typically about food production practices, but my understanding of it goes beyond that, or my understanding of it is that the theory goes beyond just food production systems to all systems that are the underpinnings of civilization. So it's, in a nutshell, it's a sustainable theoretical framework for addressing the basic needs of any society.
Right.
So sort of on a nuts and bolts level. And it does get beyond the nuts and bolts, because everything does eventually. You know, it depends on attitudes and things like this. But essentially, permaculture is a way of stewardship of the land that is the promise of which is that if you are careful and you sort of, and it's sort of a Taoist approach. You know, if you're going with the laws of nature, you will have better results ultimately than if you push against it.
Right.
Which I don't think most people have a hard time wrapping their brains around. But in practice, we have these artificial things, like, for instance, if the market's dictating that I grow this thing, and that's where the money is, my land might not be all that well suited to that for whatever reason. But if that's where the money is, that's what most people in that position will do, and they'll artificially supplement their land however they think they need to get that goal.
Right.
So permaculture is a set of practices that has to do with not insisting, but dancing with nature and cultivating a more sustainable way of moving through the world for groups of people.
Yes. So it's just beyond it's not just agriculture.
Right.
You know, it's an ideology.
Right. There are permaculture banks.
Correct.
I don't know anything about that practice, but I have heard that there are permaculture-based banks. I think that, you know, for sure you can look into permaculture practices for civil engineering and things like that. So, and I think that permaculture, one of the things that I got out of my studying permaculture to the degree that I did, is this idea of like a toolkit. And so permaculture has, wants you to develop a toolkit for dealing with certain obstacles to sustainability. And just like every other system, industrial farming has a toolkit too.
Right.
It's largely supplied by DuPont.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
So you got pests, well, kill them.
Yeah.
Permaculture would say grow enough for both of you, for the pests and the people around you. So that's one easy distinction. But this idea that whatever you're confronted with, permaculture represents a set of tools, and you can look at your circumstances and say, okay, I'm in a cold climate. This set of tools is not really applicable to me, but this other set is.
Right.
And I think that's a useful way of approaching these things, and not thinking, okay, I can just insist on growing this thing that's completely inappropriate to the climate or to the conditions that I'm faced with.
Nice. I think it's, I've always just seen it as, practices with the intent of creating a community or culture of sustainability,
That is a lot more succinct than what I just came up with.
It was just kind of my breakdown. Permaculture.
Yeah.
Okay, what's that really mean?
Right.
So, but I think that, that creating a narrative around this concept, this idea, has the potential to continue to expand beyond just the physical, the very obvious way of like practicing agriculture in this way. Once people see how these principles can be applied and the positive effects of that, maybe it will start to, and this is my hope, is that maybe it starts to seep um, into people's minds that, hey, maybe we can do a lot more things like this than just, growing amazing food and having a food forest.
Mm.
Um, and having something that works with nature. And there are things to be addressed in society that we haven't seemed to find answers for. And I think approaching it in that way, perhaps, might be more beneficial than approaching it in the way that we've been approaching it.
Absolutely. I keep coming back to this thing. Like I said, the beast I thought we were fighting doesn't feel anymore like that's what we're actually needing to fight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it's like an unwillingness to look at those issues. I don't think it's a lack of the information, the data, especially these days.
Right.
The data's there, But our culture, and I can only speak, from my own experience with this, but it seems to me like most people in our neck of the woods are pressurized in ways that prevent them from adopting some of these attitudes, and I think that when you start to look at, okay, say for instance you're right, which you are, as far as I'm concerned,
mm-hmm.
you're absolutely right that there are these other ways of moving that the dominant culture doesn't seem to be down with,
mm-hmm.
that would result in a greater benefit for a greater number of people, mm-hmm. a greater amount of the time. So, but you'd have to consistently apply those things. And so what's stopping us? Like, that's where my brain always goes is, all right, well, what's the pushback? Where's the pushback coming from? And, what's stopping everybody from doing exactly that?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me like you can have cottage industries here, there, and everywhere as long as they don't threaten the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
But what it feels like to me more and more is that most of the regulations that make it difficult to do those sorts of activities,
Mm-hmm.
And most of the systems that are designed to protect us from certain deficiencies or excesses of alternate ways of moving through the world and fulfilling our needs,
Mm-hmm.
They're largely based on an exploitation. They're largely based on a monopolization of the resources. Like there's a certain subsection of society that has the market cornered, and they want to keep it that way,
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as we're doing stuff that's not threatening to that, they don't care. It's it's fine. But if you start saying the mechanisms of supplying our needs,
Mm-hmm.
are themselves part of the issue, part of the problem,
Mm-hmm.
then it gets gummy pretty quick,
Mm-hmm.
and so then it's like, well, so that having the information available is not difficult,
Right.
But like one little recent eye-opening thing for me was that I realized in dealing with a lot of institutions of higher learning and different applications of even things like grant funds, mm-hmm. and stuff like that. What it feels like is, hey, we're looking for new solutions. We're looking for solutions to these problems, right?
Right.
But the more you get into that process, the more you realize that that's not really the goal, because the solutions have been there all along.
Correct.
So what's the real beast that they're hunting? And it feels to me like what it is essentially novelty, but not in the sense of entertainment, But like, okay, say for instance you figured out like the perfect composting system,
Right.
um, and you teach it at a university class.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, okay, this is it. This solves all these basic problems. We've run it through from every angle, and this is absolutely the most bang for the buck. This is the way that composting is pretty basic. You know, I mean, like the like you said, the elements that go into
The
it.
mechanics of it.
Yeah, yeah,
The biology can be
yeah.
a lot more complicated.
Right. But basically, you want a robust microbiome, and you
Right.
and you want an elimination of pathogens, and
Right.
you know certain basic things to get that good compost. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you could get boutique about it and have like, okay, well this compost is ideally suited for this thing,
Right.
but essentially this is as old as it gets.
Correct.
You know, like
Mm-hmm.
the kind of soil that is good for growing stuff. The problem is you can't sell courses the next semester. You know, it's kind of like the problem with textbooks, and they like, we got to publish more textbooks. Well, we got to change something so that there's this,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we've done something,
Right.
you know? And I think that once you start seeing that pattern, it's hard to miss, you know, and that's one of the reasons I have a problem with the whole design will save us
Mm-hmm.
mentality. You know, I also don't think like, you know, become all of us becoming Luddites is going to save us either. You
Right.
know, but I think that the fact is that there is that the funding that's available for those sorts of things is primarily going to be directed toward a novelty
Mm-hmm.
rather than something that's tried and true and less maybe sexy or less marketable or less,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And like I said, this is not just for compost, which is inherently not all that sexy, but you know, for other things even at the university level.
Right.
You know, there are problems that there are adequate solutions to, and they're kind of shelved frequently.
Right.
And it's, you know, and so there's this fashion I've mentioned to you before, this like fashion
Mm-hmm.
Based understanding of group dynamics at the world level, like in all these systems there's this like, it's not because there's a qualitative difference, you know, between generations or between product lines or something
Right.
like that. It's like cars, like, is this year's model really better?
Right.
You know, well, probably in some ways. I mean, certainly if you look over your shoulder 30 years ago,
Right.
you know, there's some real improvements. But there's not like enough improvements year after year to warrant the car machine that it, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
the level of depreciation that when you get on that new car and you drive it off the lot and it's like worth, you know,
Yeah.
20% less than it was before you drove it off the lot.
Right.
You know, it doesn't justify that. And, you know, at that point you got to discard all ideas about rational consumers and
Yeah.
you know, because we're all subject to that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I know I'm like kind of all over the place,
No,
but
I mean, you know, I think for me, you know, I would say we generally find the sprint way more sexy than the marathon,
right,
right?
yeah,
The short race, man, it's going to be over in, you know, 10 seconds.
yeah,
You get to see all of that power and force exhibited right in front of you. And the marathon, it's like, damn, man, at best,
right,
that's a 2.5 hour watch.
right,
You
Right.
know, if you're looking at the best people who do it,
right,
right? And, but in terms of endurance, if we had the choice, if we could take one pill and be sprint ready or another pill and be marathon ready, we would take that marathon pill in most cases,
Yeah.
right? Depending on what we're preparing for. And so I think that what you mentioned, the outcomes often of even research is
Right.
based on this sprint mentality.
absolutely,
And easy check marks, easy way to say, okay, this is complete, you know, because in the beginning, when we even talked about what this research was going to lead to, it was only to satisfy this very immediate need.
right,
This course, this grant, or
Right.
whatever it was.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily to bring that out into the world and say we want to use this information and in a practical way where lots of people can use it, right? You look at most research that's done, it's for a very small minority of people, and even those people are just looking at it and approving it and saying, yeah, that's good research. How does it get applied? The things that we've learned about environmentalism and all the things that we could be actually doing.
Right.
That is not stuff that we're going to do and see the results of tomorrow in the immediate sense.
Right.
In the broader sense, yeah. I mean, and so that is where we keep running into the issue. Like what's the end goal? Or where's the finish line? Right? And most people, you put them in a race and say you have to run a race. You want to run the race where you can see this finish line right in front of you, or you want to run a race where the finish line is 26.2 miles away.
Yeah.
Most people are more like mentally, psychologically prepared for that finish line in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of what we talk about, a lot of these, sustainability, permaculture, all of that is not like the principles are like not understood.
Right.
It's just the amount of time and commitment and dedication that people feel immediately ready to put into it.
And I think that's all completely dead on in terms of dealing with like the end user,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you would think that the people that were invested in the production would be all marathoners.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that they'd be like, well, no, this is the way to keep it going. And interestingly, they claim to be a lot of times, like the ones that are you talk to industrial farmers, they think that this, the way you do things is lunacy.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Because in their mind, they're saying you're going to feed more bang for your buck. You're going to feed way
Right.
more people.
Right. With completely negligible nutrition.
Exactly.
But
in the
got
short
stuff.
term,
Yeah, right,
their
right,
bellies
right.
are full.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you say, with all empty calories.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's hard to argue that when
Yeah.
there's starving people all over the world.
And
But
there are.
so there's this funny thing, that narrative assumes that people all over the world haven't figured out how to grow food.
Right. Absolutely.
And mostly what they figured out is regenerative practices. Mostly what they figured out is how to sustain themselves based on what they have.
Mm-hmm.
But we come in and say, no, for one, that takes a long time and it's only feeding you. You have enough resources for us to extract.
Right. And then you go do other stuff with your
Exactly.
life, right? Like
we'll do an exchange.
Yeah.
Don't
right.
worry about using all this land the way that you've been using it.
Right.
Right. For thousands of years.
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Because there's a resource there that we need. Where we can, if we just move you off of that land, you don't worry about feeding yourself because we'll feed you. We'll drop bags of rice
Right.
from the sky.
Right.
You eat
Right.
that,
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And that's the name of the game a lot of times. The free formula for nursing mothers in third world countries was for the purpose of making customers. Not
Correct.
not for doing a good deed.
Right.
And it usually is couched that way. I mean, the enclosure movement, was to get butts in factory seats because they couldn't convince these, poor peasants who were happily feeding themselves and each other
Right.
with, the commons. Well, you can't. We got to get them into the factory seats.
Exactly.
We got factories and
Right.
products to make. You
Right.
know. So that idea of that's kind of what I'm talking about. That most of these systems, when you boil them down, they have mostly to do with taking either animals or other people
Mm-hmm.
and sort of vamping on them.
Yeah.
It's a vampiric
Yeah.
system. And people are now saying, hey, these animals are their lives are worth more than just feeding you.
Right.
You know, and wouldn't it be healthier for everybody if maybe we ate less of them, and the animals that we did eat at least had a decent life before we ate them?
Correct.
And you've got people, old school mentality, conservative types that are like, this is lunacy
Yeah.
to ascribe any kind of agency to these animals. They're dumb animals, eat them, shut up. You know, and this is, you know, the softening of people and all this stuff. And the people, these are the types that will say you're approaching it from, or approaching issues from an emotional standpoint is inferior.
Correct.
You know, so this whole hierarchical thinking is all one memeplex at the end of the day, which is we know best, we get to choose for you. So don't question it. Don't try to come up with an alternative.
Right.
You know, like, and that's what I meant earlier about, well, who decides what the best practice is?
Right.
Because the best practice, according to the people who are benefiting the most at the systemic level of maintaining these systems where people don't know how food is made, don't know how to, you know, like feed themselves and all that kind of stuff, are going to say this is the best of all worlds. You know.
And why do you think that narrative is so pervasive? Why do you think the masses are allowing, you know, this minority group to make decisions like that?
Well, I think that you know, there's a lot has been said about the ideas of, like, I mean, what we're talking about is enslavement. What we're talking about is like putting people in a form of prison. Okay. And if the bars are visible, they are a target for resistance. And if they're not, they're harder to find. They're harder to fight. You know. And so I mean, this is nothing new that I'm talking about, but I think that our system is largely about creating invisible cages for as many people that aren't the beneficiaries of the existence of those cages. And I think that narratives have developed around who they are and you know who's actually benefiting from it. I think that largely it's anybody who's adopted the attitude that their life is more valuable than anybody else's, or more valuable than somebody else's. Anybody who subscribes to an ideology of that, wherever they come from, whatever they look like, they're part of the problem. You know, and I think that until we collectively start addressing the issue of compassion for each other, you know, and an enlightened compassion, an emotion that has the support of intellect,
correct,
you know, and rationality, we're gonna forever be, you know, dealing with the topiary aspects of the plant and not hitting the root. And the root is there is an attitude that suggests that whatever resources are available in any form exist for the purpose of exploiting those resources for the benefit, typically, of the person who recognizes that resource. So it's not one person, it's not, you know, some little cabal, it's, you know, it's anybody at any level at the time at which they decide what I want or my life is more valuable than what you want or your life. Okay?
correct.
That's the attitude. I think that's where the resistance comes from. And systems have grown up around controlling challenges to that idea. And those are the systems that I'm mostly focused on now. It's not so much like the systems of resource management themselves. It's more like, how do these systems that we swim in, how does the water that we swim in become invisible to us? Mm-hmm. And how do we unconsciously subscribe to our own diminishment? And at what point are we as individuals contributing to the diminishment of the people around us. So that's where my brain is swimming these days more than anything else. It's not so much that I think that the ideas themselves or the technology is the problem or is the solution. It's more that I'm kind of recognizing that unless we become human, you know what it comes down to? Like fully human?
Mm-hmm.
What it really comes down to is the question, like, we've got all this apocalyptic entertainment going on,
Right.
zombie apocalypses and all this kind of stuff, nuclear winter. Okay, here's the real issue. If we sacrifice our humanity for our survival, then humanity is not worth saving anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, all it's doing is kicking the can down the road. Because if your survival depends on your dominance and like destroying everything that's a challenge to you, it's your turn in a minute, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's coming for you too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I mean by and intellectually you can trace that as a pattern. It's not like an emotional, oh, we need to be kind to each other. Yeah, we do need to be kind to each other, but we need to do it for all the right reasons.
Right.
And we need to understand those reasons. We need to understand the resistance to those ideas. Like, where is that resistance coming from?
Yeah.
And I think what it comes down to is we see it all the time. People are like the Walmart phenomenon. I mean, it's been well documented that Walmart destroys whole economies and is, pulling resources and paying pittances and a lot of their employees are on food stamps and all this stuff. But you poll the audience, especially around here, what do you want me to do, man? Mm-hmm. They've got the cheapest price on this or that or the other thing. They've got it. They're open 24/7. I can,
right.
And you end up, if you try to convince people that they're contributing to their own diminishment, and for sure they're contributing to the diminishment of the people who are working their butts off and still needing to get food stamps,
right?
Like that sort of thing. That's that's where we need to engage. We have to figure out that on a long enough timeline, we all get screwed by that system.
Correct. And I speak from the experience of, you mentioned Walmart.
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to manage food co-ops, which is it's almost the opposite in terms of structure and ideology. Here we have this community-owned entity. We all support it, support the principles of it, get behind it, and in the long run, it will benefit us.
Right, that's the theory. Yeah,
greatly.
Yeah,
as opposed to going to the convenience.
Right.
And lower prices.
Right.
The cost of those lower prices. And generally, people who support a place like a co-op understand all of those things, and on some level,
right?
Some more than others. Yet they still make the decision to take money out of their own pockets, meaning an entity that they own,
right,
and put it into a place across the street, on pennies on the dollars of savings.
Right. Yeah, for next to nothing. They'd kill me for a cigarette.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just the idea that they're going to save a little more, they're taking out of their own pocket.
Yeah.
To quote unquote save, right? Right now, I mean, the narrative, hey man, gas prices are whatever they are.
Yeah, they're high. Yeah, and they are
high.
Yeah.
But relative to the actual cost of us living on and depending on fossil fuels, gas should be $100 a gallon. Right.
Yeah, all those costs are
right?
buried.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this community, what's mass transportation look like?
It looks like crap, is what it looks like in this.
And to even bring it up,
yeah,
it's almost laughable.
Completely. And you and I both live.
And there's resistance to it, to the idea
right.
of a robust transit system,
right,
where people don't have to have their own personal, or 3 or 4 personal cars,
right.
One for one use, another for another use. I mean, people have multiple cars. for convenience.
Yeah.
You know, so there's that's to me that, like, every side of that coin. There's the people who monopolize and make the most from it, but they're only allowed to do that because so many people are willing to settle for some ripple effect benefit of it. Like, think about that.
It's a manipulated perception, though, right?
We can buy a pair of jeans
Right.
for $15,
Right.
because that cotton was actually harvested not far from here,
Mm-hmm.
shipped all the way
the world.
across the world,
Yeah.
manufactured and shipped all the way back.
Yep.
And still we're paying less than $30 for
Right.
a pair of jeans, right? So what we ignore is how all of that is even possible. We know
Right.
how much fuel is. We know it doesn't ride on that boat back and forth for free. We know it doesn't get turned into a textile for free. We know people don't sew all of that stuff for free, or do they?
Damn close. A lot of times.
And so we talk about things like, slavery being something of the past, and I always think, how did it exist in the first place, other than enough people found a convenience in it?
Yeah. Yeah.
An opportunity. It wasn't just the plantation owners.
No, absolutely
It
not.
was the people who loved sugar and
Right.
cotton and tobacco and rice, all of that stuff at a reasonable price.
Yeah.
It's the same way it was traveling then that it's traveling now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not a coincidence that the 13th Amendment has the exception that if you're in prison, it doesn't apply to you.
Yeah, this is not for you.
Yeah.
So man, that was a pretty, we covered a lot in that.
Yeah, that's a fact.
And I think what we're seeing is that we can continue to, there's so many kind of offshoots of this conversation. We can continue to go down that road, and especially when you think, like, where we started was talking about sustainability.
Yeah. It's all one thing, man. I mean, that's the issue. Right. To me, like, to my way of thinking, there's, the one thing is everything.
Right. Right.
But it's really one thing.
Right.
So.
It's one thing.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks for having this discussion.
Yeah. Well, I'm super stoked about continuing this discussion.
Yeah.
This discussion is going to keep going.
Yeah. I hope that it grows some legs, and I hope that we can continue to, have some thought-provoking dialogue. And we just want to encourage people to check it out, share it, give us some feedback, and
Definitely.
we'll keep trying to do it.
Cool.
All right, man.
Right on.
Peace.